Hello and welcome to Mindscapes, our series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today has been associated with a remarkable Indian institution with a reputation for success that is global, and despite the associations with India as a developing country, his work and leadership in an area has placed India amongst the top 6 or 7 countries. I'm referring, of course, to India's space program. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. K. Kasturirangan, who's the head of the Indian Space Research Organization and several institutions and organizations that are involved with this process. Dr. Kasturirangan, you head and lead an organization that you have been associated with for some 30 years. You have been leading it for 7 years. And what is truly remarkable about the organization, which is almost contrary to what happens with other institutions and structures in India, is that we have seen continued success over several decades of leadership, of different leaders coming in. What is the secret of this continuity, in a sense?
Well, there is no real secret in that sense, because what we do is very obvious. But what's interesting is the fact that, first of all, the organization is highly goal-oriented. There is a direction, and there is an end goal to which we are all working. That's one aspect. The second aspect is when it is goal-oriented, you also don't work with open-ended programs. You have a cut-off date, you have a cut-off budget, you have resources which are available to you, well set earlier, and you have to manage it. So you need to learn a culture and you need a methodology which is highly professional, otherwise you can't succeed in this. The third, of course, is that space always is an area where the divide between success and failure is a very, very
sharp line.
So you are always sitting on the edge and you can't afford to make mistakes. And this everybody knows right from the top to the bottom, because everybody is involved in some form or other in the chain to build that final system. So there has to be a discipline which is not for an individual or a collective group, but for the whole system. So that is another important element. So, and then of course you need that, you have to have that discipline. Essentially means you have an importance for the individual, you have an importance for the system, and you have an importance for collective activity and the synergy. So if you put all these parameters together and treat it as a demand on a system, a collection of human beings, I think the answer naturally emerges why it is unique and why it has to be unique. And I think the rules of the game has been well set, and so long as, and there is nothing mystifying about it. The rules there are rules of games, and the rules of the games are well ordered, structured, disciplined, so that if you violate it somewhere, then you had it. So, and everybody knows it. So long as you follow the rules of the game, I think the end goal can be achieved. So that's how we work. And this is a thing that we have right from the top to the lowest level, who are responsible ultimately for delivering. And when I say responsible, even at the lowest level, the fellow finally who puts even a small component into a system and connects it, he knows the importance of that in the ultimate achievement of the goal.
And yet, you're also a secretary in the government of India, in the corridors of power, which we sort of associate with sort of musty, dusty files, and delays, and the very nature of the bureaucracy and the associations that go with it. How have you managed to insulate yourself from the processes that we associate normally with that?
Actually, it's a very interesting thing. On one side, your word, the insulation, really is a very right thing in the context of the type of situations which you described. On the other side, our very existence depends very much on the linkages we create all across the system, both within the governmental and the non-governmental. But coming specific to the point of the linkage, rather to the insulation, see, this is something that was earlier thought of by Homi Bhabha. He knew that if the atomic energy program has to move forward in this country, and you have to have a viable structure devoid of inelastic bureaucratic rules. That's what is written down. He said there is a need for a new structure to manage the system, and he created the Atomic Energy Commission. And space has spawned out of the atomic energy, if you know. And we have more or less borrowed those concepts of a commission structure. The importance of a commission, first of all, one should know that the department has been traditionally kept with the Prime Minister. So that gives it a stature or whatever you want to call it, but equally importantly an independence. Within quote I want to say that you can't have independence in the system without working with others, but there is an independence. And the commission structure essentially means that you have the key decision makers in the country is a part of the commission. You have the principal secretary to the Prime Minister, you have the cabinet secretary, you have the finance secretary, and you have 2 or 3 technical members. And the secretary to the government and the Department of Space chairs this commission. So what you want to have as a directive, as a planning, in terms of resource allocations, procedures, everything you get it endorsed by the commission, which enables you to run the system in the way you think it will be most efficient. So this has been so for the last 2 decades in the ISRO system, and I feel that the commission structure has worked very well. And it has provided the best of the support inputs with the blessings from right from the top, that is the Prime Minister of the country.
You know, you have written, quite apart from the successes of your own work, you have written more than some 200 scholarly papers on areas and issues of space and flight and the development of rockets and technologies. You've edited 6 books. You're sort of a hardcore scientist. How did the switch to being an administrator impact you?
That's a very interesting episode. When I had this interaction with Dr. Sarabhai at the end of my doctorate degree, and I said that I am basically a physicist, and how do I even get into an area like satellite technology, which is all engineering and so on. In fact, I myself was not very clear of this borderline. He was very perceptive in telling me that you know, this is an area where only a physicist can do justice, because when there is a multiplicity of engineering, multiplicity of technologies, the management of such systems needs a broader vision, which can come only from a good scientist like a physicist. And then he gave me the examples of what they had done in US. John Simpson of Chicago, who was a physicist who built some of the very famous spacecrafts. So he said that there is an element of a system concept, there is an element of looking at the totality, a holistic approach. And in this holistic approach, it is not the question of only the technology, there is a management, and there is a question of financial things, schedule, the whole cost, what you call as a configuration. So you graduate from science into science management to technology and the related issues to systems management, and ultimately go into areas where the relationship between the technology, the product and the projects, where the money and the resources come in, you see that starting the relations, and then go further into how these systems then becomes useful to a whole set of users. So you see how it grows like a tree, and then but you start with a small thing. At that point, when you sit there, you think that this is a small thing that you started with the science, but then it has allowed you to grow in this direction. And but the scientific temper, the attitude of looking at things rationally, properly, and analytically is the fundamental basis. So I realized it after that discussion with Sarabhai, and it transformed me to accept the type of role that he was having in his mind in the years to come.
You're also remarkable in that your primary grooming in your area of work has really been within India. You are a product of India's educational establishment, of Indian training. And to what degree is our space program truly Indian in that sense?
I think it is substantially Indian. Like me, most of my colleagues are people who had their education in India. Many of them had their graduation from IISc, IITs, regional engineering colleges and many colleges. Most of them then came into the space program and started directly contributing into the space program. In fact, if you look at it, the key people today who head the major aspects of the Indian space program, they were all people from the Indian institutions. So, and then the thinking part of it. There is a substantial element of what you call as an Indian thinking, because when you have to manage big programs, and these programs call for interfaces not only within the system but outside the system, and that calls for a certain method of interaction, there is a certain cultural background to this interaction. You find that being part of an Indian system where you grew and evolved, I think has its own advantages. You know.
So what is this uniquely Indian process, in way of thinking, of interacting? Can you sort of identify some elements of
Yes.
it?
You know, if you ask me in a very simplistic way, if I have a formal way of managing a project, I will write down a PERT and those kind of charts which ultimately lead you to a management technique, a management tool, then keep certain control on my control room, I look at it and so on. Now we expect that this kind of a thing will work in this country, it won't. You need a personal interaction which is much more intensive than what you need in the Western countries when you do a management of a project, because the management of a project in the Western countries are dictated by how you, if you fix a milestone, you complete the milestone and you have a performance there, you get the money. So that is the incentive to complete something and get paid. We don't have that kind of a system. You know the Indian system of paying, Indian system of accountability, and Indian system of performance. So you need an element of motivation, an element of inspiration, and you should make it look that he is not only responsible for delivering, but that is his system. So that is the mindset you have to create in the people, that each one of them is contributing and he is a part of it and he owns it, and when it performs, he is responsible for it. And it is not the money then that comes into picture in the relationship. And this is beautifully Indian, I should tell you. It is not that you get this out of anybody. And you have a personal relationship. And when I talk of 15 or 16,000 people in the organization, I keep a substantial contact with many layers of people. And I don't think this is needed in many of the other management systems. You are familiar with the top man can be in his room, he can sit with some of his board members and look at it. You don't have to be a field marshal and at the same time a general. But I think this is the kind of a thing that you need in this country. And I think that's a very fascinating way of looking at the management, which is totally Indian. And there's something unique. Maybe Oriental, I may say, if not at least Indian.
It also seems sometimes to the sort of scientific Western temper, a contradiction that you will have someone do a prayer before a satellite launch, or sit down and then put a verminal mark on his forehead, and then come surrender to the processes of science. Have you ever felt that was a dichotomy that needed to be reconciled?
No, there's nothing. In any system, when you do things, there is nothing like 100% perfection. And you can take it to 99, you can take it to 99.9, you can take it to 99.99, but that 9 continues. So somewhere there is a 0.0000 uncertainty. Now what determines this uncertainty? I mean, there is no science that determines. There is a science which only puts this number as an uncertainty. So what you try to do is that, who is the appellate authority who can say that, okay, please fill that gap. So you create mentally a way to look at that kind of an uncertainty and go to an appellate authority. And the concept of a God is a very beautiful one, because you can virtually put to that entity anything which cannot be resolved by the natural processes through the rational processes. So there is room for a limited amount of, if you want to call it irrationality, but I don't think it may be irrational, there is a room for it. And in our own experiences, many things happen which you can't explain. Now, how do you reconcile with it? Either say that it cannot be explained and leave it at that, but then that is not scientific temper. So you need a certain reconciliation. And those reconciliations come for these kind of thinking and the thoughts. And I think it's a very beautiful way of creating that kind of a approach to satisfy yourself that everything you have done, there is a small thing that is left and there is somebody who will take care of it, and therefore you make it 100% kind of a thing.
Well, most activities in India are determined by sort of astrological configurations. Has that ever come up? Have we ever sort of looked at satellite launch timings or dates?
No. Maybe my colleagues might, some of them might be there, but I personally, I don't think that I'm aware of any such situation where astrology has played a role ultimately, even though if, for example, if we had a launch which had to be cancelled for some reason, and they will try to bring in an explanation that that was not the period it was to have gone. But then these kind of things, one can also equally well create a rationale why it could have gone also. So I don't think those are important at all, but one should not bring in that kind of a thing. That's more personal than a logical, global way of looking at this.
You're an astrophysicist really by training, and we are currently in the midst of a sort of almost a national, well, that's perhaps giving it too much emphasis, but let's say a discussion on the issue of astrology, and to what degree is this a science, and to what degree the movements of planets in the heavens influence human behavior. We've had Professor Narlikar as one of the scientists who's taken public issue with this.
Right.
Do you have any personal belief or see a role in astrology?
You see, I am the product of a tradition, you should know. Generations, my own family in generations have been steeped in this kind of beliefs, and even if I had to get married, they have to check the horoscopes. So it is not something that is unusual in an Indian Hindu family. One should know that part of the ground rule.
Sure.
The second part of it, if you really look at it, most of the newspapers even carry the astrological prediction as one of the sections.
Sure.
And there are at least studies which are very clearly brought out. The presence of that particular sheet improves the circulation of that particular paper, though there is a lot of people who read it, whether they believe it or not. And then, so you see, this is something which is, and this is not only here, it happens elsewhere. It is something which is related to the frailty of the human mind. You know, the human mind, it wants to read something, and if it is good, you believe. If it is not good, just leave it. So that is a kind of a thing. So it is a part of that overall psychology. To how much extent these are important in the life of a human being, how much it can impact the life of the human being, is something there is nothing wrong in understanding it. If the current level of our thinking and sophistication of science leads us to a better understanding of how these kind of methods and methodologies can influence the overall human being's outlook, it is something, I may be talking too philosophical about it, but I think that is the root of the whole astrology. There is nothing wrong in learning it, nothing wrong in understanding its implication. And you know, in UK there is a department which formally teaches astrology, if it is towards a better understanding of the basis for this. And the basis, even if it is irrational from the modern scientific point of view, but there are many things which looks irrational in the modern scientific point of view. It is worth understanding it within the limitations of what our mind can comprehend. I think it is an exercise it has to be gone through like any other area where you don't understand and therefore you try to understand. The other part of it is also that there is a lot of people who make money out of, make a living out of this kind of a thing. If they think that they can become professionally qualified and this is a clan which can commercially become an important element of an activity not only in our country, elsewhere, there is another way of looking at
maybe
it.
we'll start exporting IT, astrological professionals.
I understand. There are Indians who look at the astrological aspects of it, and there are people who are willing to believe them. There is somebody whom I knew who knew about the palmistry, and he said that he knows how to read the palm of the people, and the whole host of his colleagues in the foreign country apparently used to line up in front of his house to find out whether they can read their hands. So this is very interesting aspect of it. This is all related to how a human being looks at it. So it is not the question anymore of a debate between a science and a non-science. It is a question of a debate between what you want to really look at